On NewsX World, let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said he will meet the UN nuclear watchdog chief ahead of US-Iran nuclear talks to tackle their disputes over Tehran's nuclear program and avert conflict as US warships deploy to the Middle East. Israel's cabinet has approved further measures to tighten Israel's control over the occupied West Bank and make it easier for settlers to buy land, a move Palestinians called a de facto annexation. The Kremlin has rejected a baseless assessment by 5 European countries that Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny died from poisoning while in an Arctic prison 2 years ago. We naturally do not accept such accusations. We disagree with them. We consider them biased and baseless, the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said. The mother of deceased Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny has said that she felt vindicated by a European assessment that her son died of poisoning. Navalny's mother has called for justice as his supporters marked 2 years since his death in prison. A global artificial intelligence summit kicks off in New Delhi with big issues from job disruptions to child safety, as India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi will inaugurate the 5-day AI Impact Summit at 5 p.m. today, which aims to declare a shared roadmap for global AI governance and collaboration. According to Indonesian Army spokesperson Doni Pramono, Indonesia is preparing 1,000 troops for possible deployment to Gaza by early April as part of a proposed multinational peacekeeping force. Pramono said that the final decision rests with the government, adding that a total of 8,000 Indonesian soldiers will be ready for deployment by June. Investigators have obtained a DNA sample from a glove that was found near Nancy Guthrie's Arizonan home and appears to match the pair worn by a masked prowler seen in doorbell camera footage before she was abducted 2 weeks ago, the FBI have said. China's Russian oil imports are set to climb for a third straight month to a new record high in February as independent refiners snapped up deeply discounted cargoes after India slashed purchases, according to traders and ship trafficking data. And for your top story this hour, the Kremlin has confirmed that peace talks on Ukraine will take place in Geneva this week, focusing on the main issues, including territorial concerns. The talks, scheduled for 17th and 18th of February, will involve Russia, Ukraine and the United States. The Russian delegation will be led by President Putin's aide, Vladimir Medinsky, and will also include military intelligence chief Igor Kustovo. A separate working group will discuss economic matters, with Putin's special envoy Kirill Dmitriev representing Russia. These talks come at a time when Kyiv faces mounting pressure from the US to reach a deal, while Moscow continues to demand control over the entire Donbas region. Key issues such as who controls the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant and the role of Western troops in the post-war Ukraine remain major sticking points. US President Donald Trump has expressed his desire to help broker an end to the conflict. We are now being joined by Alison Mutzler, who is a former AP Borough Chief, and she is joining us from Bucharest. Thank you so much, Alison, for joining us here today on NewsX World. What
Hello.
does Moscow's willingness to discuss territorial issues in Geneva suggest about its negotiating strategy and priorities?
Well, obviously, all kinds of information have been coming out from the talks over the last few months. But what it's boiling down to is territory. Now, Moscow has maximalist demands. It wants as much territory as it can obtain, territory which it has not seized during its hostilities against Ukraine. And that is something that Ukraine hasn't been prepared to budge on. That is the sticking issue. There are other issues they will budge on, but territory is a key issue because, quite rightly, they say that if Moscow hasn't conquered, hasn't captured these areas, hasn't acquired them, to quote Donald Trump, acquired them, then why should Ukraine relinquish them? The fact that Moscow is saying that it will discuss territory is because they're cutting to the chase. That's the main issue. I haven't seen anything to suggest at this moment, and that doesn't mean it hasn't happened or is not happening behind the scenes, that Moscow will back down from its maximalist demands. And that will be the sticking point, and it has been the sticking point between the two sides, Ukraine and Russia. The fact that Russia says it wants to discuss territory means, for once, Russia is being upfront. Usually they say things very indirectly, they hint at things, they allude to things. They don't say things, or they make sarcastic jokes. They don't say things directly. But now they're saying something directly. I would expect them at Geneva, at negotiating tables, to repeat their maximalist demands. Now, I might be wrong, and if I am, that will be a change in Russia's attitude. But so far, Russia has been very inflexible in its demands.
And can these territorial disputes, historically the most contentious part of the Ukraine conflict, be realistically addressed in diplomatic talks?
Hard to say. I mean, the obvious solution for somebody who's, not a diplomat would be, a frozen area, a no-go zone, which is patrolled perhaps by foreign troops. And, some territorial concessions, if there is to be an end to this 4-year war, there will be some territorial concessions, but that will have to be in agreement with Ukraine. And there's a lot of pressure on Ukraine. But the only way I can see some sort of resolution in other areas is a sort of frozen area, a no man's land, which is patrolled by foreign troops, which again, international troops, which will again, or international forces, will be very tricky for Moscow, I think, to stomach, to agree to. But that could be some sort of solution. But again, all these things are very, very tricky.
And obviously, as we know, there's been talks and no really clear path has really come out of them. The only thing really is the prisoner exchange. Does this, what Moscow has now said about they want to bring up the territorial issues, does this inclusion of this signal progress towards a substantive negotiation, or is it going to simply raise the stakes without a clear path forward?
As I said, Moscow is not known for being direct. They're not known for being frank, saying things clearly. The fact they've said this means that they are raising it and they're saying this is what we actually care about. But I don't see, I do not see Moscow backing away from its maximalist demands and demanding practically all of Donbass. And I don't see at this point Ukraine agreeing to that. It's possible that Donald Trump can step in and say, bash their heads together and come to some kind of compromise agreement that there will be an area which is controlled by international troops and doesn't belong to either country. That's possible. But I just think I do not see Russia budging on its position at all. It hasn't budged so far. It's the very reason why Vladimir Putin has stayed in power. It's because he plays this strong man. He doesn't budge an inch. He doesn't give an inch. He doesn't cede anything. And he marches on and he expects everybody to get in line. So I don't think it would be in Russia, the Kremlin's interest, to concede anything, to make concessions.
Thank you, Alison.
I might be wrong, but this is what I see at the moment.
Thank you. Don't go too far, as we will be back with you very shortly. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has responded calmly to Vladimir Zelensky's insult at the Munich Security Conference, where Zelensky criticised him for growing a belly instead of strengthening his army. Orban thanked Zelensky for his remarks, claiming they would help Hungarians understand the situation better. He emphasised that Ukraine's EU membership is not just about personal conflicts, but the future of Hungary, Ukraine and Europe. According to reports, Orban reiterated Hungary's position of opposing Ukraine's rapid EU accession due to security and economic concerns. We are now being joined back by our Alison Mutzler. Thank you for joining us back here today. How significant is Hungary in blocking Ukraine's path to an EU membership, and what does this reflect about the unanimity of requirements in the EU enlargement process?
It's very difficult. Hungary is basically playing a role for Moscow in the European Union. It's very critical of the European Union, but it doesn't want to leave the European Union. It's been very critical of Ukraine. It opposes military weaponry being sent there. I understand that Orban again brought up the issue of ethnic Hungarians who live in Ukraine. Again, that's another Russian talking point. You know, the Russians, they have their own problem with the minority. They said Ukraine didn't give them enough rights. And then, there are Romanians and Moldovans who live there. But, Bucharest has stayed away from that. They're part of the Western Alliance. But Orban is raising these grievances. He's a thorn in the side of the EU. And yes, you do need unanimity to join the EU. So he could, along with Fico, the Slovakian Prime Minister, they could block Ukraine's accession to the EU, unless the EU does something for Hungary. But then we have elections in Hungary in less than 2 months, I think, probably 2 months, about 2 months' time, in April, early April. So it's possible that Orban might be out because he has a serious contender who is also patriotic, quote unquote, but much more pro-EU than Orban is.
And in the context of EU-Ukraine relations, how effective is public diplomacy, such as Zelensky's statements, compared with behind-the-scenes negotiations with member states like Hungary?
Well, obviously, there are what national leaders say publicly and what they say privately behind the scenes, and then there's also relations between, perhaps Orban has better relations with the Germans, for example, and they could be relied to lean on him. So it is hard to say. Obviously they have to make public statements. Behind the scenes, other things are happening, and they will emerge later. But Orban has a very clear position. He accuses, I think, the European Union of funding the main contender in the elections. He's possible. He's in his last months of power. He's been in power since 2010, a very long time. And he's been very clear, anti-Ukraine, anti-EU, but again, still remaining in NATO, still remaining in the EU. So basically, he's a thorn in the side of Europe and NATO as well.
And should the EU reform its accession rules to prevent a single member from blocking strategic decisions, or does Hungary's position rightly reflect sovereign national interests?
Orban is playing a game here. Orban himself is playing a game. He's pro Donald Trump. He's pro Putin. We can't sugarcoat that. It is difficult, particularly as the EU is expanding, or there are members who are part of the accession process, including Ukraine and the Republic of Moldova, who both fear Russian aggression, and they think that if they get to join the European Union, it will it will bring more of a rule of law, less corruption, more democracy, and these are things, to be honest, that Putin fears. and Orban acting as a sort of spokesman, not exactly a spokesman, but acting as an agent for or an asset for Vladimir Putin in Europe, he pushes this. But it is a tricky thing that one single, it's not even one single country, it's one single politician could block, the entry of an accession of another country joining the European Union. And there are 27 members of the European Union, and so it does seem a bit tricky. It does seem a bit it's a vulnerability that one single country could block the accession of other countries. Which that if Ukraine and also Moldova were to become members of the EU, it would be a strategic decision. It wouldn't just be sort of like joining a members club.
Much, Alison Butler, for joining us here today on NewsX World. It's a pleasure speaking to you as always. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has stressed the need for faster defence spending. The British government is considering advancing its goal of spending 3% of GDP on defence. This comes after a recent budget increase which raised the target to 2.5% by 2027. Starmer acknowledged that rising costs in defence would require the country to speed up spending. The UK currently spends 2.3% of GDP on defence, above NATO's 2% guideline. However, pressure from the US and NATO has led Britain to reconsider its targets. The government is also focused on balancing its budget while increasing defence funding, despite financial constraints. Let's listen in.
4-year anniversary of the start of the conflict in Ukraine. We want a just and lasting peace, but that will not extinguish the Russian threat. And we need to be alert to that, because that's going to affect every single person in this room, every single person in this country. So we need to step up. That means on defence spending, we need to go faster. We've obviously made commitments already in relation to that.
We are now being joined by Dr. Satoru Nagao, who's a fellow at Hudson Institute, joining us from Tokyo. Thank you so much for joining us here today on NewsX World. As we just heard, that the Prime Minister Keir Starmer may be feeling growing pressure from the US and NATO. That's why he's feeling the need to up his defence spending. But what do you think are the main reason that Starmer must believe that he must accelerate it right now? Do you think it's because of the US? Do you think it's because of NATO? Or do you think it's just a mix of combination of everything going on right now?
UK has took the charge of the defense or military issue in Europe for a long time, so that's why they understand how important the military issue is. Recently, not only the UK but also the Germany, the France, or other European countries start to feel that they need military power, and over-reliance on the United States is not good. But the gap is very big because, for example, the United States has 3,000 combat-capable military planes, but in this case, the British has only 200, France has 200, Germany has 200. So if the combined forces are formed by the British, France, and Germany, total number is only 600, but the US has 3,000. So such kind of the big gap exists. So if the European countries start to realize how important to avoid the over-reliance on the United States, they should show the very strong effort to do that. Just 5% of the GDP is a small thing, just the beginning. And in this case, generally, to build up the military power, they need to spend a long time. For example, the building warship demand 5 years from design to build and deployment. So 5 years, after that they start to train and deploy, and so to operate the weapon effectively, they need 10 years, 20 years, something like that is needed. So this is just the beginning, and they realize how serious. So that's why the Prime Minister emphasis how important to start a military build-up just now, and the result of this build-up will come, and at least 5 years later, 10 years later, 20 years later, something like that. That's why they need to do that.
And what impact could faster defence spending have on the UK's role within NATO and European security policy?
In European security, indeed, the UK took the charge of the military for a long time. For example, France deployed some certain number of the troops, the German deployed some certain number of the troops. In this case, UK takes charge more than the France and the Germany. So that's why the UK's role in Europe is very important in this case. Even if the Brexit and leave from the EU, still the NATO's framework or EU's defense cooperation, the UK's role is important. So that's why UK very strongly say this is very important. So this is not just a pressure from the United States. Indeed, this is the truth. If the European countries lead world affairs now, in this case, the European must rebuild their military power is the truth. So that's what, but for example, one of the example to build up how long they need is Winston Churchill pointed out military industry demand 4 years process. First year just investment, second year the small production, third year the mass production, fourth year flood of production. So that's why at least 4 years is needed, but at least 3 years is needed to get many weapons. So from this, if the European countries start to build up this military, the first weapon they will receive is 3 years later. And so that's why they need to move just now is logical.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stuhiro Nagal, for joining us here today on NewsX World. Hungarian opposition leader Peter Magyar has vowed that if he wins the upcoming elections, his government will extradite former Polish Justice Minister Zbigniew Ziobro and his deputy Marcin Romanowski. This comes after Hungary granted asylum to the two men, escalating tensions between Budapest and Warsaw. Ziobro, the architect of controversial judicial reforms in Poland, faces charges of abuse of power and heading an organised criminal group. Despite being stripped of immunity in Poland's lower house, Ziobro remains abroad, claiming unfair treatment if he returns. The extradition promise highlights the growing political rift between Hungary's anti-liberal government and Poland's new leadership. Let's listen in.
For me personally, the 1,000-year-long Hungarian-Polish relationship crucial, and to strengthen this relationship, rather a friendship than a relationship. And of course, a strong V4 could be based only a Polish-Hungarian relationship, friendship. So that's why the first step is to restore, to strengthen the Polish-Hungarian friendship. And I see a very good chance to achieve it very quickly.
Syrian Kurdish authorities have reportedly released 34 Australians detained in northeastern Syria. These individuals were held in the ROJ camp due to family ties with Islamic State jihadists. The group included women and children, all from 11 families, marking the first time in years that no Australian nationals remain in Kurdish custody. The families were handed over to relatives who travelled from Australia to collect them. Meanwhile, Australian officials have confirmed that they are not repatriating citizens from Syria. Authorities stated that security agencies are closely monitoring the situation and are ready for any Australians seeking to return independently. The release comes amid growing domestic debate in Australia. Some political leaders worry about the security risks posed by the relatives of ISIS members, while human rights groups push for repatriation due to harsh conditions in the camps. Though the Australian government has repatriated a small number of citizens in recent years, the issue remains sensitive. Israeli producer Dana Eden, known for the hit spy thriller Tehran, was found dead in her Athens hotel room on the 15th of February. Greek police confirmed the death and stated that 52-year-old's body was discovered after a relative's unsuccessful attempts to contact her. Authorities are treating the case as a suicide based on evidence and testimonies, with pills found at the scene and bruises on her neck. Her production company, Donna and Shula Productions, expressed deep sorrow and refuted rumours of criminal or nationalistic motives. That's all we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.